Hey historians, welcome to 8th grade social studies text practice questions. I'm Mr. Birch, and today we're going to be talking about the War of 1812 and how it affected U.S. economics. As always, when you see the question, press pause, take a moment to read and answer, then press play, and we'll go over it together. Let's get started. All right, how did the War of 1812 most affect the U.S. economy? Now, this is a question you're going to be seeing probably on your STAAR test because we've seen it pop up a few different times on every STAAR test in some form or fashion in this same way. All right, so pay close attention here. How did the War of 1812 most affect the U.S. economy? A. Disruption in trade contributed to domestic industrial growth. B. Small farmers benefited from higher export prices for grain. The sale of treasury bonds to international companies was prohibited. And new trade alliances resulted in increased foreign investment. So what is the question asking? Well, this one's kind of hard to narrow down because it's a really short question, so pretty much all of it is what it's asking. The War of 1812, how did it most affect the U.S. economy? Well, what can I eliminate? New trade alliances resulted in increased foreign investment. Usually during the middle of an international war, you're not going to see a lot of alliances increasing foreign investment because you're in a war, so your country is in turmoil. The War of 1812 saw the British actually burn the White House. Other countries are probably not going to be investing in our country when they see some of our most iconic buildings up in flames. Next, small farmers benefited from higher export prices for grain crops. Again, that's another one that doesn't make sense because if you think about us being in war and our limited ability to ship goods internationally, the ability to have more money based on exporting goods, again, not very likely. All right, so what do we need to know? Well, the War of 1812 was chiefly fought between the newly formed United States and the greatest naval power in the world at the time, Great Britain. With the British being the main trade partner of the U.S., the war forced Americans to rely on their own ingenuity to begin industrializing and manufacturing many goods that once were available to them only from the British. After all, when you're at war with someone, they tend not to want to trade with you. So this kind of forced Americans to have to industrialize because the things that once we were shipping raw goods to Great Britain, they were shipping us finished goods and we would buy them back from them because of their great industrial growth. Now we were forced to have to find a way to produce these same goods because we were no longer allies at this point. So let's see what the answer is. Well, disruption in trade contributed to domestic industrial growth. Our country grew industry because we didn't have any other choice. We couldn't trade with other countries, or not as frequently or as easily as we could before. So we were forced, and many businessmen were forced to come up with creative solutions, thus growing our industry. So the War of 1812, what were the causes? Well, a brief overview here. Great Britain was fighting Napoleon's France at the time and didn't want American ships bringing supplies to France. Makes sense. They were trying to limit the French's ability to sustain themselves during this time of war. So they restricted access to much of Europe and even impressed American sailors into the British military, which was kind of the final straw that broke the camel's back here. When you see the British taking American sailors, not American military men, but American sailors, and forcing them to join the British Army, that was kind of enough for the Americans to say, no, we're not going to take this. So what were the effects of the War of 1812? It asserted itself, a lot of things back, basically. America asserted itself and confirmed its position as an independent nation. Again, we had proven our independence and gained our independence from Great Britain just a few short years before. And again, they were trying to take our people into their military. So when we finally won the War of 1812, it was our way, or the American way of just saying that, no, we are independent. In fact, even though the war didn't go so well for the Americans much of the time. We began identifying ourselves as Americans as an industrial society. That's the answer to this question. And then the Federalist Party died out during this time. There was a surge of popularity for one Andrew Jackson, who eventually became president because of his victory at the Battle of New Orleans. And this ushered in the era of good feelings after the War of 1812. So this war was only a few decades after the British signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783, essentially granting sovereignty or independence to the United States. The War of 1812 saw the U.S. White House get burned by the British and the U.S. eventually show its power on the international stage. The war officially ended at the signing of the Treaty of Ghent on December 24th, 1814. The picture you see here is a Lowell Mills girl at work. Lowell Mills was a town where there was many mills or industry factories, and this begins springing up during the time of the War of 1812 and shortly thereafter, when industrialization became really prominent in parts of Massachusetts and other areas in some of the New England colonies. And this was a direct result of the War of 1812, forcing the United States to have to industrialize on its own rather than relying on the industry of other nations like Great Britain.